Welcome to the Way Out Recovery Hour. I'm Bob Sharits, and remember that asking for help is the first step. It's another beautiful Monday. I love starting off the week with this show because it gets me excited. I've been spending the last week looking at what we're going to talk about, and so it really gives me a great starting point for my week. If you're sitting out there and you dread Mondays, lighten up. Mondays are cool, man. Especially now, you get to listen to this show. So we have a very special guest with us today. We have Linda Davies, who's the Executive Director of the Domestic Violence Center in Santa Clarita. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you, Bob. It's great to be here.
It is. You and I, it's really cool. Our city's getting bigger and bigger by the day. We have, I'm going to say, close to 300,000 people living out here, and we still somehow maintain that small town feel, right? You know, and you and I are both professionals in our respective companies or organizations or fields. However, we bump into each other at your granddaughter's school and my son's school. We see each other in the community. And so it's nice to be working with you on a professional level, but it's also really cool that we're friends in the community too.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, I say week after week that if you're listening and you need help, that it doesn't matter who you call, please call somebody. But I want to give our numbers, because asking for help is the first step. We are at 661-296-4444. We're the Way Out Recovery, SCV.com. We are relatively, I'm not saying new anymore, we're a relatively new treatment center in Santa Clarita. We've been open about a month and a half now. And
that's relatively new.
Relatively new.
Yeah.
Not brand new, but relatively new. And I say that because it feels like we've been open forever because there's such a need for both your services at the Domestic Violence Center and our services. There's such a need in our community that from the minute that we opened up, we were getting calls. And so it feels like we've been around for a very, very long time. We just get calls day after day after day, which is really, really awesome that people are talking about the heavy issues like drug use, abuse, addiction, like domestic violence, and that people are out there in the community talking about this stuff, and even better that they're asking for help. More and more, I think little by little, we chip away at the stigma of these heavy issues because they're tough issues to talk about. Yeah. And before I forget, listeners, we are going to talk about some and tippy toe or even jump right into some heavy issues today. So, if this triggers something for you, or if you are in the middle of a domestic violence situation, please, again, ask for help. Get to somebody that you know is safe. Grab somebody for moral support and get the help that you need. So tell us about you and your organization.
Okay. Well, our organization is not a new organization, so It's been around since
Relatively
1983. So we're about 34 years old, and what we have is a residential site, which is a shelter that's for people who are really in danger for their lives as far as domestic violence is concerned. We also have a 24-hour hotline where people can get hold of a trained advocate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
What is that hotline?
That hotline number is 661-259-4357, and that's a place where you'll call. Sometimes people don't really know if they're in a domestic violence situation, but a lot of times what it is they're seeking a refuge. They're seeking resources. So we probably get on that hotline close to 300 calls per month and probably give out about 2,000 resources on a monthly basis to different places, different shelters, sometimes to places like you, and to different agencies, even law enforcement, hospitalization, stuff like that. So we really try to give them what they're looking for when they call, but it's all around domestic violence. It's all around intimate partner violence and what's going on in their lives. And then we also have an outreach center here in Newhall, and that's where we really offer help to people that are in Santa Clarita, women, children, and men. men that may be experiencing intimate partner violence. Last year alone, probably at our shelter, we have a small shelter. Santa Clarita women, we transition and safety transfer out of Santa Clarita because this would be their danger zone. That's something people don't always understand about us. They always think, but if you think about it, their batterer is still in this valley.
Right.
And so they need to be safety transferred out to some place where it's like witness protection. They're not going to be found. They're not going to contact them. They're not going to come to our house, things like that. So so we probably, because we're a small shelter, service probably maybe 100, 125 during the course of the year. At our outreach center here, we service about 1,600 people who are coming to us with domestic violence issues, whether it be physical violence, it's emotional violence, psychological, sexual, financial. There's all different types of domestic violence. It's who's ever in a power and control relationship where their lives are being completely controlled by another. It can be a man and it can be a woman who's doing the controlling. It can be either one. 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence, 1 in 33 men. Sexual assault, it's 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men will experience sexual assault.
Well, and when you were talking about identifying whether or not there even is any of that stuff going on. A lot of people are sitting in the middle of that power differential and being taken advantage of, or in the middle of an intimate partner violent relationship and don't even know that that's not normal for them.
Right.
And when you talked about this being a danger zone and people who are local don't go to this shelter, they're transitioned elsewhere. Oftentimes, because of the psychological aspect of it, the person who is making the contact is the person who's been battered, and women or men will return to those types of relationships over and over and over again.
Well, I think recidivism is very big in both of our fields. Right. So, it takes like 9 times for a woman. That's pretty much what the statistic is, that it could take up to 9 times for her to leave that relationship. But it's very complex because there's usually children involved. And the other thing that I always preface in educating people about domestic violence is it's a love relationship, whether people think it or not. I mean, I hear women say, I would never stay with anybody who hit me, but again, I think for recovery, and we're a recovery program also, because you witness that some way in your childhood. So when you have to go back and you have to heal, you have to have the courage to go back and look at those first relationships that you were in, both as the person who's going to be abused and the person who abuses. So, because that's what they show is that childhood trauma is the one thing that the batterer and the victim of domestic violence have in common.
Right.
So the batterer has probably seen battering happen, and that's what he's or she has grown up with, is what love looks like. And then the self-esteem issues that come up with the person who gets involved as the victim of domestic violence can be that they saw that in their family around abuse, or it could be the fact that they could be coming from a home where nobody was home all the time and they didn't feel like anybody loved them, and then all of a sudden this person comes into their lives who loves them in such a controlling way that they think this is correct and right, but that's why it's hard to go. And then normally there'll be children involved, I always think it's easier. I know it's easier if you don't have kids, if you've been in a domestic violence situation, because you're going to be having to deal with that abuser for the next 18 years if you have a baby with them. And that's even if you're out of the relationship, there'll be issues in court, there'll be issues with, custody issues, all of that stuff that will continue. So it's really a tough thing for people too. And also women are going to lose like 100 to 50% of their income when they leave. We've had clients come and tell us that the lawyer has said to them, when he realized how much money they were going to be able to get to support themselves and herself and 3 children, the lawyer looked at her and said, "Can't you take one for the team and just hang in there?"
Right.
You know what I mean? Because people don't realize just, how bad it can be and how horrible it can be. And also, those children stay in that relationship, then those children are seeing that relationship, and that's going to perpetuate it again in the next generation. And that's really why you hear people say all the time, we want to break the cycle of domestic violence.
Sure, it's bigger. Yeah, it's bigger than what's going on right now, as if that isn't big enough. Think about that, right? 1 in 4.
Right.
1 in 4. That's a huge, huge, huge number. If 1 in 4 airplanes were crashing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, we do. A little bit more
It would
for
be
it,
a
yeah.
very big deal.
Yeah,
We'd be
yeah.
looking around and going, "What's the problem here?"
Right.
Right? And we do have some wonderful programs, and a lot of us do look around and say, "Hey, what's the problem here? Let's try to fix it." However, it's one of those things that nobody likes to talk about. Everybody, I don't know about nobody. That's a generalization. However, it's very difficult to talk about.
Well, it's because it's a shaming. I mean, the victim gets blamed a lot of times in this, and so people don't talk about it. And
Right.
it's interesting because we talk about when we go to different events and there'll be tables set up places. A lot of times people don't want to come over and talk to us.
That's how we are too.
Yeah, because nobody wants to think that, maybe there's something happening in
Right,
that family,
right.
And so we try, like when we go out into the schools, we talk a lot about healthy relationships and healthy connections,
Right.
and how, because there's 1 in 3 teens will also be in a teen dating abuse relationship. So that's something that we do. We were in 5 different schools.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you guys have people going into the schools, right?
We do.
Yeah,
we
nice.
do. Yeah, to really to talk about what that's, and we work hand in hand with the schools and with the counselors in the schools, because a lot of times they might refer somebody to us who's having an issue. And we work very closely with the college as well. We have an advocate on site at the college once a week, so that kids that go to the health center, they can refer them over to us, or students that go there. So,
Outstanding.
Yeah, so we
outstanding.
can work with them.
Well, and it's so here's an example of having a booth at an event. We had a booth with a giveaway, and it's exactly the same thing, and we're giving away whatever it was. And I'm out there, I had the kids out there, and we're giving the pitch, "Hey, come sign your name on this thing." And I was going, "Look, all you have to do is put your name on the list and have a 5-minute conversation about something nobody wants to talk about, and you could win this prize." And people are like, "Okay, I'm sold. I'll come talk about it." And it's always amazing to me that if you can get people in. It's not that amazing, I know, just because I know, but if you can get people in to have the conversation, how many people are affected by domestic violence, are affected by substance use disorders, are affected by these things that nobody wants to look
trauma in general,
at.
I mean, I think that's a lot of what we talk about too, is that there's so much trauma that people have experienced in different ways, and that affects just the way that people can relate in the community, the way kids learn in school, the way, relationships are built. I mean, and I think one of the things that I saw in my research when I was looking at talking with you today is that, the thing about alcohol and drugs is that, there is a high percentage of alcohol and drugs with some people that experience domestic violence, but it's not the cause of why they do domestic violence.
It's the coping skill
It's
a
the
lot of
coping,
times
yeah,
for it,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I tell you, I've been running groups, family groups and otherwise, for about 10 years now, and sometimes some of the groups are 100%. And I think that everybody's got something, but I would say that certainly 80 or 90% of every group that I've done, once people are safe enough to open up about what's going on, they all have some sort of abandonment, trauma, neglect, domestic violence. There's something, either a lot of times as children. And what happens is if somebody experiences the sorts of traumas that we're talking about, that it leaves a big old scar on them psychologically. And you go through life with that psychological scar, and when the pain gets great enough, you look for ways to minimize that pain. And if you're a teenager and that stuff's starting to surface, between the ages of 12 and 17 is when most drug use starts.
Right.
And here comes somebody smoking some weed or drinking or whatever, and I've got that stress that I've been carrying around for 12 years.
Right.
And all of a sudden I take a drink, and for the first time in 12 years, that alcohol makes that stuff feel like it went away.
Right.
Your brain makes a decision in that moment and says, we're going to keep doing this because it makes me feel a whole lot better. And so now we have 2 issues, right? I was listening to the last show that was on here, and the doctor was talking about taking some medications for certain kinds of traumas, and what he said was, it's like having a flat tire and just turning up the radio.
Yeah.
We'll just turn up the noise louder so that we'll just pretend we don't have a flat tire and keep on driving, right?
Right.
And alcohol and drug use on top of trauma is a lot like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a lot like that,
Yeah. No, I had a teen say to me once that he felt like once the first time he ever did drugs was the first anxiety-free day he ever had in his life.
Right.
You know what I mean? So how do you You know what I mean? Like how you have to have something that's going to be just as good as that to have kids stop.
Yeah, sure. And how do you combat something like that? Here's the difficulty of early recovery in any arena is now you have somebody that comes to you and we're asking you without any sort of cushion behind it is we're gonna provide a safe space for you, but we want you to start opening up about the stuff that you've never opened up about in the atmosphere of not being sedated. Right. No drugs, no alcohol, no nothing. Now we want you to talk about it. They're like, are you kidding me? Really?
And you get kids sober to go out into a very chemically dependent world.
Right.
I mean, I'm a recovering person, okay? And I know for myself, like I can tell when I go to a party, I can tell if it's a 2-drink party or not. People are going to be far more comfortable talking once they've had 2 drinks. Right. And I stand in the room sober, you know what I mean? Kind of waiting for them to loosen up so we can all talk.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, well, here we go. You know what I mean? Which is always kind of interesting to me, you know? But yeah, so it is a tough thing, and I think there isn't enough, our society focuses too much on some of that stuff as well, you know what I mean? And I don't know, I find that even in our community, I mean, there's a lot of things where there's a lot of, I mean, this is great because they're all fundraisers for people, but a lot of them are focused around wine and a lot of focused around, so I mean, we have people go out and say, oh, go have a good time, but how do you have a good time without involving some kind of chemical in it, you know? Yeah.
Which may or may not be okay for, the general public, but we're talking about, 1 in 4, right? What are the other numbers you have as far as in some sort of sexual trauma in lifetime, right? 1 in 3.
1 in 3 for
one
sexual
in 3
trauma,
women.
Yeah.
1 in 6 men.
Yeah.
And so, you look in the general public, okay, we're out at a party. It doesn't matter if you're at a party or you're at a park or you're whatever. Those numbers are consistent across the board.
Absolutely.
And so we promote events where we have drinking and it's fine and dandy, but in that atmosphere,
who's taking care of the person that can't really control themselves.
Right.
And that's another thing that we really need to work with people on, is that whole issue of being an upstander and not a bystander. And that's something we talk about a lot in domestic violence. Like when you hear it, when you see it, do you call the sheriffs and do a visit call for a home? There's ways to do it anonymously, but we all need to stand up if we want to make our community safer.
Sure.
And I think that's really true, especially with teens too. When kids go out to bars, are you going to leave your girlfriend with that guy? You know what I mean? When she can't stand up,
right?
Because she may not be able to know how to say no at this moment in time. So, so how do you help them? And I think that's another piece that we don't see. And also driving, like how many people, it's been a big deal to say, you need a designated driver, but is everybody really paying attention to that? Because I think that's another thing that was a real big push for a long time, but is it still as big a push as it used to be? That we let people go out and get on the road again.
Well, we're certainly miles ahead of where we used to be with that. It's common. It's common conversation now to say, like, I'm the DD or whatever, right? Even even shorthand for it, talking about it, and it's so common practice amongst newly drinking people. I'd like to say the age of 21, but everybody knows that unfortunately the law says 21, but they're starting a lot earlier than that. What are some of when you present that to people and say, are you talking about it? Ask those questions. If you see it, what do you do? How do you have that conversation? What are some of the fears or the feedback that you get from people? Because I know
confrontation.
People don't want to do it.
People don't want to they in a sense they have to think about their friend bit more than themselves at that moment in time. And what if that person, the friend's not going to want to go, let's face it, Right. But then neither is the person who's trying to lure the person to go with them. So you just have to be ready to have that confrontation. And there are curriculums around that as well, and that would go for domestic violence. It would go for leaving somebody in a bar that maybe is too inebriated to know how to say no at this point.
Right.
And what does somebody do with that when they, that's a question I've had those calls before where somebody has actually been sexually assaulted because they had passed out, right? So then they basically got raped, but they feel so guilty because they didn't say no,
And they were in that.
And they were so drunk, and who do you call and you tell, that happened? How do you do that? And I've had to, basically this one young woman called us one time, and she just really wanted not to have to work in the same place with this guy. You know what I mean? They worked together in a business. And so I basically called the boss, who was probably the same age as she was, and said, this stuff is happening. And I'm not going to, report this or anything. I said, but I really am going to say to you got to separate where they work.
Yeah, or you can look at it from if money gets to a business owner, you can say you may be looking at a harassment lawsuit.
Well, that's
here,
what I did say to him, but
Right.
she was so clear she didn't want to lose her job.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so and it was sort of scary for her to even make the call to me.
Yeah.
But those are the things that we come up against too.
And thank God for you and your staff, because most people, maybe not most people, but a lot of people, I think, are going to be really resistant to having that kind of conversation with somebody. And you guys get in there and you have those very brave conversations because somebody's got to do it.
Right.
Somebody has to do it. And it would, I think the ultimate goal is to teach people to do that for themselves.
It would be.
Right? But until they have the strength to do that, there's people like you and me that can get in the middle of that and have those conversations.
Right.
So we'll be right back after this break. This is the Way Out Recovery Hour. See you in a couple minutes.